This section of the DevTrack Product Expert Training will cover using advanced workflow options to automate and control your process. The topics we'll be covering include applicable owners during the workflow, read-only and invisible fields, who can perform certain workflow transitions, mandatory fields for both states and transitions, transition-dependent field values, and conditional transitions. All of the workflow settings are accessed via the DevSuite admin by opening up your DevTrack project and going to the workflow section. The workflow design, which we covered in a different section, is where you define graphically your process and the transitions between various states. And the workflow options is where you will define which of the workflow automation features you would like to implement. The first is applicable owners. By simply selecting this option, when you go down to the workflow settings, you can choose any state and simply choose in that state who are the people by account type, by group affiliation, which group folders or queues are applicable, or which individual team members will be allowed to own an issue in that specific state. You can also define a set of default owners that will be applied during the workflow as well. We also provide the ability to have mandatory fields both on the update for the status and also for specific transitions. If I come down now to my workflow settings and look at the in progress status, I can see that I want anything moving into this state to have the following fields required. So you cannot move something to in progress unless you have provided certain information. I can also look at any transition, in this case out of in progress, to hold for now, and say that there are mandatory fields if you perform this specific transition. Perhaps I want to have a field that is labeled reason for hold or other explanation, or simply update the work description field to make sure that if it's being placed on hold, that there is some context being provided. You can also define read-only and invisible fields, both at the state as well as at the transition level here. And if I enable those and come down to my workflow settings, I can again look at the in progress status and say I want to lock in the description and the title and the type as read-only when I'm in the state, because I don't want it to ever lose that original information. I can even make certain fields invisible if there is something that is not relevant for this phase of the life cycle. I can simplify the user interface by making irrelevant fields only visible during those appropriate states. And likewise, if I look at a specific transition, I can make any field read-only or invisible during that transition from one state to another. You can also limit who can perform certain transitions by selecting this checkbox. If I come back again to my workflow settings and say from in progress to on hold, this is now a transition. And I can simply say, any certain account type, any group affiliation, anyone who is the current owner, the submitter, or an individual will be authorized to make this transition for the given issue. One of our more advanced workflow automation options is the transition-driven field choice selection. By enabling this, I can say for a given transition, for example, in progress to on hold again, now I can actually say for a given field during this transition, only the following values will be available, so that if there are irrelevant values for a reason field or a substatus field or any other field that may have a different meaning based on the transition or state, you can have that master detail relationship display only relevant values based on the specific transition that you are implementing. And the last workflow automation option is conditional transitions. If I enable that feature, then if I look at a transition, hold for now, for example, and look at the condition rule, I can create a rule that says if this is urgent, and this rule is based on the condition that it is an urgent issue based on that field selection. I can then choose, based on selecting a single transition, which target state it will be moved into. The default action will always be that drawn in the workflow diagram, but I can choose based on specific rules, based on specific field values, a different state to automatically move it to when this transition is invoked for that issue. When I'm ready to implement these changes, I simply click the reload button up here in the in the admin application. And if I come down to my issue list and find something that's in an in progress status, The workflow buttons here will be limited to those transitions that I have been given the authority to perform. And you'll be able to see if I click on hold for now, there are certain fields that have become red, meaning that they are mandatory. Other fields are read-only because that was defined in the transition. Some fields may have only limited values based on the transition-dependent field settings. And when I complete this, based on some of the fields, if I chose the conditional transitions, when I save this, it would actually move it into a appropriate field. In this case, it told me the work description was made mandatory. I can add a value here, and now I can move this forward. So that is a quick summary of the advanced workflow options. There is an additional presentation on our inter-project actions and automation, which is further automation that can be configured within the DevTrack system.